Hello everybody, long-term fans of the channel will know I don't really need a reason to drive a Ferrari 355, but it just so happens that today I do have one. The last time I was in one of these cars, I was explaining why, despite the fact I have had a quarter-century love affair with this car, it is and has always been my favourite car, super or otherwise. I haven't yet bought one. And one of the reasons I cited was that I was waiting for the right one to appear, and if I was going to spend money on a car, it had to be the 355 of my dreams. And this just happens to be that car. In fact, this was a car with a specification so unique, I was actually convinced it just didn't exist. But it turns out it does, and thanks to a very kind owner, I'm now able to share it with all of you. So today, sit back, relax, and enjoy the sights, sounds, and the story of this Ferrari F355. In all honesty, I'm not sure you actually need to have watched any of my previous videos on the 355 to work out why I love it so. To my eyes, it's easily one of the prettiest Ferraris of all time. And though it may not be the fastest, it wasn't even in period, it does do this. I appreciate with cars like this, you either get it or you don't. In so very many ways, you could call this an utterly atrocious car, badly built by Italians who didn't really care, terrible on fuel, not anywhere near as fast as a 911 Turbo of the day, and guaranteed to empty your wallet faster than a very bad idea in Las Vegas. But if you do happen to get it, like me, you'll love the way that this car just taps into your senses in a way that very, very few others do. So then, what exactly is so special about this car? First off, it's a Berlinetta. The F355, as it was known at launch, was available in two configurations, either Berlinetta, like this, the Coupe, or the Targa-topped GTS variant. The soft-top Spider only arrived a few years later, and to be honest, I've never really been a big fan of it. I know that actually there are a lot of people out there for whom the Spider is the one, but to me, it doesn't really give you the beautiful looks of the Coupe or the GTS, nor is it really a particularly good drive, having sacrificed its rigidity in order to give you that sort of open-air thrill. For a very, very long time now, I've been nearly constantly window shopping for my perfect 355, and I've always been unsure as to whether that is a GTS or a Berlinetta. In favour of the GTS, the roof comes out, you get that whole wind in the hair thrill, and with the roof on, it still looks like a coupe. However, I also know that it does suffer a loss of rigidity, as does the Spider, but I figured, you know, maybe in a car this old with performance like this, it doesn't really matter. The truth is, I think it does. And there's so much glass in here that with the windows down, and as we're in town, why not? You know what? I don't feel like you're really losing that much by having the Berlinetta. You do, though, really notice the difference in the way that the car handles. It feels so much better tied together, and in all honesty, so many Ferraris feel like that. Even the modern ones, the F8, as a Spider, it is just massively compromised. So that's point number one. This is a Berlinetta. Next up, it's got what many people consider to be perhaps the most important part of any Ferrari, that iconic gated shifter. Here, a beautiful 6-speed, which when it's in the mood and the oil is warm, is absolutely joyous and gives you that nice click-clack as you work your way through the gears. Sure, it's got quirks. Many of them are not very happy going into second when they're cold, but generally speaking, this is a wonderful thing, and just another part of the interactivity, the experience that you get with a car like this. As it happens, the 355 was actually the first car in the entire world to get a semi-automated robotized manual, what they dubbed the F1 box, and other companies have called R-Tronic, SMG, etc, etc. Even in its day, it was a somewhat flawed system and people could see the issues with it, but nonetheless, it did have its fans, the likes of Rossa, to name but one. Me though, if there's ever the option of a manual, that's always been the one that I've preferred. Perhaps more controversially though, and this I'd love your opinion on, the car is not red. Now, I say this as somebody that's very lucky enough to have two Rosso Corsa Ferraris, that is the classic Italian Ferrari red. But I don't actually think that is the best colour for this car. Now, Rosso Corsa is actually an interesting colour. When you've cleaned the car and the conditions are right, it's actually a spectacular paint. If the 550 is dusty, I'll look at it and go, ugh, I don't really like that. But then you clean it and you go, wow, it's amazing. However, not every Ferrari, I think, wears it all that well, and the 355 is one. The F12, for example, I think it looks great on, but the 812, not so much. Likewise, the Roma, to me, it just doesn't work in Rosso Corsa. Deeper, more interesting metallic or burgundy reds, yeah, I'm much keener on. Same again, the F430 and Scuderia. Red is just not their colour. And though here it's not exactly its worst colour, I'd never kick a Rosso Corsa 355 out of bed, I don't think it's its best shade. I have always been something of a sucker for the yellows that they do, Giallo Modena in particular, but this blue I think is stunning. If I could actually specify a 355 from new, I'd likely go with a nice green, Verde Zeltweg perhaps. But this is very, very nice. The shade here is Blue Le Mans. There were actually a number of different blues available for the car. Perhaps the most popular is Blue TDF, Tour de France, but this Le Mans is slightly rarer and I think actually slightly nicer. Other very unusual examples to see would include Blue Swatters and on occasion Blue Pozzi. Now, you must at this point remember that there were something like 10 to 11,000 355s built during its construction run from 1994 to 1999 when it was replaced by the 360 Modena. This was the last in its line to feature steel tubular construction as opposed to the aluminium frame that you got with the 360. That car also grew considerably, and if you park the two next to each other, the 360 is absolutely enormous. But for a car that came out in 1994, it's not exactly lacking when it comes to spec. It may not have traction or stability control of any description. In fact, there is a button down here where you can even turn off the ABS. It does though have titanium conrods and a red line of over 8,500 RPM. The engine may be very closely related to that you'd get in a 360, but I always felt like the 355 just sounded better. The fact that this one has 8 individual throttle bodies might be partly responsible. Peak power and torque are unlikely to impress. It's about 380 horses, 260 odd pound-foot. That's about 360 Newton meters. Combine that with a curb weight of about 1.5 tons, and though it did have a claimed top speed of, I think, 183 miles an hour, that was always suspected to be perhaps a touch optimistic. But the fact is, this is a car that's just about so much more than the numbers. It's about the way it makes you feel. In fact, the entire time I've been driving this car, nearly everybody and anybody I've gone past, cyclists, motorcyclists, pedestrians, other road users, they've nearly all either paid attention or just given me a great big thumbs up. They love the 355. And why wouldn't you? In terms of modifications, this car actually has only the 2 of them, and they both relate to noise. First off, the old-fashioned head unit has been replaced with an old-fashioned looking but quite modern Blaupunkt Bremen. And then, the most popular mod of all, the car's exhaust system has been replaced with a Capristo. We think a stage 2. It's retained the character of the car's noise, just giving us a little bit more of it. It's still valved, and like the factory system, at about 4,500 RPM it opens, unleashing an incredible wail. Easily, for me, the greatest sound out of a combustion engine ever. So So then, I mentioned there were something like 10 to 11,000 355s ever made. Accounting for the fact that not all of them have survived, let's just call it a nice even 10,000. Well, of those, by the time you account for the fact that most were left-hand drive and most were red, you're already left with a relatively small pool of cars, perhaps 1,000 at absolute best. Take away then the examples that are open top in some way, shape or form, or have the F1 gearbox that became increasingly popular as time went on, and you're now left likely with a pool of perhaps a few hundred cars at best. But this is even rarer than that. First off, it's a very early car, and this brings with it two significant things that to F355 aficionados are very important. In case you are wondering, the F in the F355 vanished when the car got the F1 gearbox. I use the terms often interchangeably, but strictly speaking, this is an F355. However, a later one may be a 355 F1. Don't worry, no one's going to hold it against you if you get the two confused. So there are two defining features that make the very earliest cars built in 1994 and 1995 so desirable. The first of which, and this does not apply for my friends in America, I am sad to say, is the fact that these got a non-airbag wheel. And I don't dislike the airbag-equipped cars just because it's got an airbag in it. I'm not the sort of person to say, I'm a man, I don't need an airbag, I'll survive a crash through sheer force of will. No, I dislike it because it looks horrid. Here is an airbag-equipped F355's wheel. And this is what we have here. Yeah, this is far nicer and just suits the whole cabin way better. As an added bonus, in a non-airbag car, you also get a handy little glove box over here behind the F355 badge, which in the airbag cars, you don't get. You have an airbag and then to compensate, a little lockable box in the middle here. The other change made has also been one of considerable debate over the years. So, around the same sort of time that the cars got the airbag in late 1995 to 1996, they also changed the engine management system. These early cars have what's known as Motronic's 2.7 system. The later ones have a 5.2. To tell the difference is very simple. You need to lift the lid at the back on account of the fact the 355 is the last mid-engine Ferrari V8 to not have a clear engine cover, and you look at the air intakes. On these early cars, you have two distinct separate paths, on account of the fact that for these cars, the engine is run essentially as two 4-cylinders, with almost entirely isolated systems left and right. On a later Motronic 5.2 car, the two airboxes then have a pipe which meets in the middle, because they have just the one sensor measuring all of the air. In theory, it's a more advanced system and came about because the car had to meet the then new OBD2 regulations. However, enthusiasts seem to think that these earlier cars with their perhaps more outdated but also slightly more liberal engine management are just a little bit better. Anytime you see the issue of 2.7 versus 5.2 raised, you'll always see somebody claiming that these early cars make a bit more power. However, I'm not sure I've actually ever seen any concrete evidence that is the case. And to be honest, if you just want a big power car, a 355 was never going to be the right one for you. I am also led to believe that these cars are just a little bit more tolerant of aftermarket exhausts. Just to confuse matters even further, though generally speaking the airbag wheel and later engine management are often lumped together, that's not actually how it happened. You will see the odd car out there that doesn't have the later Motronic system, but does have an airbag. You'll never see it the other way round though. When you then consider the fact this now limits my perfect 355 to just the first year, or maybe even less than that of production, you begin to see why I have such an issue finding the right car for me. As these are also the most desirable of all, they're also the priciest, which hasn't ever helped. But this car goes even further than that. You've got the Berlinetta bit, it's manual, it's blue, which is sexy, it's got the pre-airbag wheel, the early engine management, but the icing on the cake here is actually the interior. First off, the colour. I mean, come on everybody. Blue Ferrari, tan interior, oh, suit you, sir. The crowning achievement though, and what actually makes this car unique, is these seats. And by that, by the way, I don't mean unique how many other people mean it. This isn't just unusual or rare. This really is a one-of-one car. because it has the carbon Kevlar seats. They're woven in the same way as you'd find an F40's. They've got a beautiful yellow tint that matches the tan interior beautifully. They were a very, very rare option. But the thing is, I didn't think this car should actually have them at all, because I didn't believe that when this car was made, they actually offered them. I was under the impression that early F355s, like early 550s, didn't really have an options list. This was something that came in a few years later, and by the time it had, you got your airbag wheel, your later engine management system. No, this car's owner thought the same way as I did. This surely must be a car where someone has retrofitted the seats. So he did some digging, and it turns out they are genuine factory originals. Allegedly, not too long ago, a set of these seats came up for sale second-hand at £28,000. And as you might imagine, you cannot get them new anymore. More than that, the nature of the way Ferrari did things back in the day meant that even a car specified a few years later might actually have quite different seats, not these early carbon Kevlar ones, and certainly not the same as you'd see in a Ferrari 360 like the one owned by Sam from Seen Through Glass. These are also in their correct original factory trimming, with beautiful blue Alcantara in the centre and the shoulder pads to match the blue carpets and blue exterior. For a very, very long time, I figured that in order to build my perfect F355, I'd have to compromise somewhere. Either I'd have to buy a later car with the bucket seats, which by the way are fantastic. They do support you, but also they're massively comfortable, just really as much as the ordinary ones. But in any case, I thought I'd have to get a later car and then put up with the airbag wheel and the later Motronic and whatever it does or doesn't bring. Or I was going to have to buy an early car and then retrofit some sort of likely incorrect buckets. This proves that actually the right car is out there. The issue being that this is, like I said, the only one exactly like it. There is no other in this specification, which is annoying because I really, really want it, and its owner does not want to part with it. He, like me, was on the hunt for something like this for quite some time and has absolutely no desire to move it on. I can understand why, because he'd never really be able to replace it. It's still, though, not technically the perfect 355, I have to say that, and that actually doesn't exist, because much as I do love it, and I'm sure it's pretty clear, I do love it, the F355 has one Achilles heel: the steering. It's rubbish. Far, far too light, far too heavily assisted, the rack is too slow, it just doesn't work. In the 550, they got it absolutely bang on, but here, it's just not good enough. This is a Ferrari weakness. They're so inconsistent with their steering. Some cars are brilliant, some cars are atrocious. And unfortunately, the 355, it's atrocious. But there is a fix. In theory, there might be a car out there a bit like this, which doesn't actually have power steering at all. The 355 was available without it, and I assume that essentially gives you the same setup as the 348, which never got power steering, and as a result, actually steers really quite nicely, if very, very heavy, at low speeds. The other solution is that during its run, the 355 was available with something called the Fiorano handling pack. This is something that they've offered on it. This is something that's been available on a number of Ferraris, and here you've got the usual stuff: lower, stiffer suspension, but also a different steering rack and power steering pump, which apparently fixes the issue with the steering. But that was definitely, I think, only available later, and therefore that also wouldn't be the perfect car. Annoyingly, these parts have become unobtainium. You just cannot get them. They did fit them to the later Ferrari 355 Challenge Evo cars, and at certain points in the past I've actually thought about buying a race car and turning it back into road spec as a way of getting the bits that I want. But even those are hard to get a hold of. So then, that's a look at my unicorn, my almost perfect Ferrari F355. What's yours? What's that car that you know must be out there somewhere that you've either seen or have been waiting for it to appear in the classifieds? I'd love to know. Anyway, I'd like to say a huge thank you to this car's owner, Mr. E, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.